Mr. Harris here, and welcome to a new video. In this video, we're going to talk about metals. So, you probably heard of this question before. How are metals useful to us? Or why do we use different metals for different occasions? Or what are the applications of metals? And when did we even figure out that these metals even exist in the first place? So, before that, let's look at the history of metals. So, humans have been using metals for many, many, many years now, and we have divided into the golden ages of certain metals. So, here we have the Copper Age and Bronze Age here. Actually, bronze is not a metal. This is an alloy of two metals. Later on, we'll learn what's the meaning of an alloy. So, here are the two metals that are combined together. It's copper and tin. And here we have the Iron Age. So during these periods, that's when these metals were primarily used, and we usually refer to the golden age of these metals. And metals, we can extract them from the rocks in the Earth's crust. Now, what's the meaning of extract? It's like you can take them out. So how are metals taken out from rocks? We'll be also learning that. And these rocks, we have a special name for them. We call them ores. O-R-E-S, ores. Say, for example, if I have a metal ore, I have a metal ore called bauxite. Now, this metal ore bauxite, the metal that I could extract from it would be aluminium. So these ores, they would have a specific name to them, and I would be able to extract a specific metal from it. But the catch is in, for example, this ore, or even in this ore, it's not just containing that metal. It could be containing some other substance. So we'll later on also figure out some ways that we could extract that. So another example of an ore is hematite or hematite. Now this ore is to extract iron. And later on we'll learn some more like calcite is for calcium, extracting calcium metal. So metals take up about 24% biomass of the Earth's crust, and you can see this is a very, very beautiful picture. The percentage by mass of elements in the Earth's crust. Now, here we're talking about the abundance of elements. So, the most abundant element, or the element that's the most frequent on in the Earth's crust, is actually oxygen. Now, here we're talking about elements, guys. Elements is on the periodic table, the ones that there are like more than 100 of them. It's that one. We're not talking about metals yet. We're talking about elements. Now, number one is oxygen. Do you notice this is a non-metal? The most abundant element is actually a non-metal, which is oxygen. And then silicon here, this is number two. Silicon, is this a metal? Nope. This is not also, sorry, this is a semi-metal or a metalloid. And number three here, that's where we finally get a metal, which is aluminium. Now, aluminium we know is a metal. But if I'm just going to say which metal is the most abundant, then it is obviously aluminium. Okay, the most abundant metal is aluminium. But if I were to say, what about the most abundant element? Then that is oxygen. I'll write here, the most abundant element. But then you're like, sir, it doesn't really make sense. Because I know we've learned in Form 2 that in air, actually, oxygen is just 21% in air and nitrogen is 78%. That how can there be so much more oxygen in the Earth's crust? Now, this oxygen, it's not only in air, it's also in the ores. Remember I said here earlier, I was saying like these ores, it does not only have the metal, but it's combined with some other elements. Now, a lot of these ores, they actually have oxygen in them. So they have oxygen, or we call it oxides. They have them in them. That's why the most abundant element is oxygen. Okay, but again, our main focus here in this topic, we're talking about metals. So actually, number one for metals is aluminium. Number two is iron. Now I'll come back to this later about the most abundant metals. So now let's move on. Now a few of these metals. Now the key word here is a few. They exist as elements in nature. Now what does that mean? I'll prefer to use the word free state. So they are usually by themselves. So they're very, very, very easy to be extracted. So probably you've heard of something called gold panning. Now later on, you'll be learning this in the coming few topics. Now, primarily for a few metals, you can extract them like they're by themselves. Like gold ore, you'll only find gold in it. Silver ore, you'll only find silver in it. So it'll be that simple. And most of the times, you're just gonna use some physical method to extract these metals. So one of the examples of a physical method is this gold panning that I was talking about. On the other hand, some other metals, they will exist as compounds. So like I was saying for like bauxite there, I'll write it here for you. Bauxite here, it's not only containing aluminium, it would also contain oxygen in it. So you can see, remember we learned that when two elements are chemically combined together, that's what we call a compound. So now these, if there are compounds, if these ores they exist as compounds, then we will need to extract them using some special methods. Okay, and these the main of the way that we call this, or the name for these methods, we primarily use it to say that these are some chemical methods. Okay, and then primarily in this book you will learn just one, which is carbon reduction. But another one, you have heard it before while you're studying this topic, which is electrolysis. So using electricity to extract the particular metal that you want. Okay? So the use of metals, they're related to their availability in the Earth's crust. So whether they're abundant or not, like aluminium, it's the most abundant. So obviously you'll use it quite often. And also their ease of extraction, whether they're easy to be extracted or not. Now let's look at the history and the use of these metals. So you can see in 5000 BC, from that time, we've been already using gold and silver, and primarily it's used for jewelry or ornaments. Copper, also quite some time ago, and primarily used to make some tools. Iron, roughly around 2000, 1000 BC, and you know their uses for weapons, buildings, and aluminium, it's rather quite recent. Okay, now do you see? I want you to see here. That's like somewhere in like 5,000 years back, in BC, I should say, not 5,000 years back. And rather recently, aluminium is quite recent. Now, why is there this discrepancy? Isn't aluminium, remember earlier I said I'll come back to this point? Isn't aluminium one of the most abundant metals? It is one of the most abundant elements. It's number three, but it's the most abundant metal. But shouldn't it be the one that was discovered first? But here we have discovered in history, we have discovered gold and silver, or even iron first. Aluminium is actually quite late. Why is that? Why is it quite recently that we've discovered aluminium? And this comes back to our use of the ease of extraction. So gold and silver, as I said, they are very, very easy to be extracted. You can just do some physical methods to extract it. Physical methods. And also it has to do with its reactivity. Gold and silver, they are less reactive. They don't really react much with some other elements. Iron and copper, on the other hand, they are moderately reactive. Moderately reactive. Moderately. I'll just write the word moderately. Moderately reactive. And because they're moderately reactive, then you might need to do some chemical method to extract the particular metal. And that method is carbon reduction that I talked about earlier. Carbon reduction. So what carbon reduction basically is that you're just adding carbon to its ore and then you're heating it up. So obviously carbon, at that time you've also discovered carbon. I mean not you guys, but in history, at that time it was quite simple to do it. And same thing for copper, sorry. But aluminium, on the other hand, this was only recently found. It's because the process for you to extract it is actually quite complicated. And the reason is because aluminum is not just a simple metal, or like I should say, it's quite reactive. Compared to these other metals, it is more reactive. And because it's so reactive, you need to find a way to do a chemical method to extract its ore. So just doing panning would is not enough. Just carbon reduction is also not enough. That's where electrolysis comes in. So we use electrolysis to extract aluminium from its ore. And it makes sense. Look, electrolysis, I'm using electricity and I need that technology. Do you think back in like 1000 BC, 2000 BC, was even this electricity thing even a thing back then? Of course not. It's rather quite recently, like in the 1700s, 1800s, that's when that's when society actually developed their science and technology. And that is why it's rather recently found. So actually, the abundance of aluminium has nothing to do with its discovery. It's just it has to be the ease of its extraction. Okay? So, now to summarize everything, gold and silver can be extracted easily because, as I said, they are quite freely found in nature. You can find it from a gold ore or from a silver ore. So, these were the first metals used by humans actually. Aluminium, on the other hand, even though it's the most abundant metal, but it's difficult to extract from its ore because we need to use electrolysis. And for electrolysis, I need electricity. So that's why it's used at a later time, even though it's the most abundant metal on Earth. Copper and iron, on the other hand, they are moderate availability and ease of extraction. That means, as I said, they're moderately reactive. So somewhere in the middle, moderately reactive. But for this, we're still using a chemical method, which we'll learn later on. So it's more difficult to extract iron than to extract copper, okay? And we'll also learn why is it for some metals they're more difficult to extract. Obviously, it's because of their reactivity. So iron is more reactive than copper. So the more reactive a metal is, the more complicated or the more difficult it is to extract it. So that's why iron was used at a later time when compared to copper. So the use of metals is related to their availability, okay? So nowadays, that's why we're using quite a lot of aluminium, but of course, gold is still gold and silver is still being used till this date, and their ease of extraction. So gold and silver, they were first discovered because they were pretty easy to be extracted and to be discovered. Okay, so it's a wrap for this video. Then I'll see you in the next one. Bye.